Well, you may not believe this, but we actually made a budget starter barbarian build that can actually farm on less than a pull rune worth of currency. No, that's not a joke. We actually did it. You can actually farm on a budget barbarian because of the changes in patch 2.4. You can actually just start farming high priority targets in hell in really nice density areas in Nightmare, so you can actually get yourself started on this ladder. Alright, you know what? Fine. I'll just show you. While it's actually pretty easy to create a starter or budget variant on a lot of the classes in Diablo 2, one of the ones that get shafted so often is the Barbarian. You can't just simply put some FCR and plus to skills with a stealth rune word onto this bad boy and send them off and actually build a legitimate melee competent build. Well, that was until the changes in 2.4. On what I'm going to be dubbing on the War Leaper or the Leap Crier or the War Attacker, you can kind of call it whatever you want, we're going to be using the incredibly powerful Leap Attack skill, in addition to maxing out synergies for both Find Item and Grim Ward by being able to dump enough points into Find Potion and picking up enough of your combat masteries so that you can output a ton of damage, have good single target and AoE clear, as well as incredible mobility, crowd control, and survivability. And on top of that, the Mercenary is rocking some set pieces and a really cheap rune word, which are going to make it so that we can deal with immunities, increase our kill speed, and actually have a tank that can survive hell on little to no gear. If all of that sounds fantastical, I'll let the gameplay footage speak for itself. Then come back here so I can show you the skills and how we got there, so that when you look at this gear, you understand how it can actually output what you're seeing right now. The new Leap Attack skill adds on a massive amount of attack rating and damage according to your skill level, and then in addition to that adds a flat AoE effect that's going to be dealing a consistent physical damage in an AoE around you that's slightly larger than that of Warcry. If you haven't seen my previous video, this AoE can also hit the same target multiple times per attack, meaning that you're sometimes doubling up your total DPS, and being able to apply this to multiple targets around you means that this melee barbarian is also a really good AoE clearhouse. Taking your weapon of choice and maxing out the mastery is going to add an additional set of damage and attack rating, and also give you an incredibly important critical strike chance. And then what is probably the most important part of this kit is actually having 1-point wonders across your Warcry skills, still getting very competent bonuses out of them, and in addition to that, abusing the fact that both Find Item and Grim Ward benefit from synergy points in Find Potion. Most Barbarian builds, until they're into the late game, really cannot afford to have high-level Warcries in addition to their combat skills with their synergies and their masteries. The only way to get ahead of faster farmers like the sorceress and the paladin are to pump out more items per hour than they can, and that's where Find Item comes in. But since it now gets the synergy bonus from Find Potion, and Grim Ward will add slow crowd control effects and increase your physical damage against targets by a massive amount, we needed a build that could actually pump out full synergy points into Find Potion without completely hamstringing itself across really important buffs like Battle Orders and Battle Command, as well as decent stun length here on Warcry and Battle Cry, which is going to drastically increase your chances of hitting bosses and reduce all targets' damage against you, giving you that added survivability. To be able to accomplish this, we have to do a lot on a little, because every piece of gear that I'm wearing is something that I was able to farm starting in Nightmare in very early hell with little to no gear to start, and also gain access to farming a lot of key areas that are necessary for progressing early in the ladder. One of the problems with melee barbarian builds is that the majority of rune words that you need to be able to make the weapons are decent in the early game and fall off really hard in the late game. And even with additions like Unbending Will, they still struggle because the majority of the rest of their gear needs to have so many stats, and you can't start farming until you have the gear. So it's this catch-22 where you don't have the gear to farm, and you need the gear to be able to farm. So you're forced to start off on something different. But the fact that we're getting damage and attack rating from multiple skills means that all we need to be able to do is focus on getting as many plus to skills as possible onto the build, and luckily the Barbarian is able to do that incredibly easily. Random Barbarian helms that you find on the ground have early access to additional plus skills, as well as staff mods that are going to get you stuff like battle orders, battle command, find item, grim ward, natural resistance, anything that you can name. In addition to that, you can pick up a normal primal helm and then socket it with something like a lore, adding +1 all skills and additional resistances on top of the stats that it already had. This helmet in particular we actually got from rescuing Anya while we were doing our quests as a reward. The Barbarian skill armor myth is probably the easiest to make and easiest to wear out of all the skill armors, considering the highest rune required to make it is just a hell rune. Now, just because this video wanted to make fun of me, I got this hell rune from my Hellforge quest, but you can be dropping these as early as Act 1 Nightmare. The rest of the gear is actually even less powerful than what you've already seen, and I'll leave the weapon for last just so that you can run through the rest of the stuff that we have. 2-piece Angelics is going to give us a massive bump to our attack rating. So when we're on our base gear right here, we're being brought from 5,000 up to 14,000 attack rate. So that's a massive benefit from just a single piece of Angelic, because leap attack gives so much attack rating and so much damage. You basically don't need to worry about this stat on any other piece of gear. For the rest of what we're wearing, we have random run walk res boots, res in life on a belt. This is an all res attack rating ring that we managed to get off of Ormus, and then some perfect chances that I got off of Nightmare and Dariel. While there are so many better melee options available in this glove slot, I just wanted to show you the fact that starting at this point with almost no gear on your character, you can already stack a lot of magic find in typically very important gear pieces on a melee build, but this Barbarian basically gets to cheat as far as gear restrictions are concerned. For the charms, we're just rocking whatever plus to maximum damage, life, resistance, or magic find you manage to get your hands on, or gold find if you're doing something like a Trav run. Obviously we have a Geeds, but our Geeds is straight garbage. But again, this is just something that you're going to see in every single build. I think the only thing that might be a little contested here is the Annie charm. Now, first off, our Annihilus is hot garbage. This is the first one that we got from Lucky's Diablo walk at the beginning of the ladder. With the changes to how declone is spawned, and I'll go ahead and include the max roll link below in case you're not up to date with how it works, the Annihilus charm is incredibly common now in patch 2.4, at least on softcore playthroughs. Considering you literally don't have to do anything and just eventually a declone is going to inevitably get spawned in one of your games, I'm now going to start arguing that an Annie should be considered a budget item, especially if it's not a perfectly rolled charm in the first place. On swap, using anything that's going to give you additional plus skills or additional to war cries is going to help to bump up your battle commands in battle order, as well as getting you a higher level find item or grim ward if you're not using the weapon that we are. And in addition to that, a higher level battle cry, which is so important again for reducing incoming damage and making it easier to hit bosses. But the thing that brings together this particular version of the budget, and I want to go over this weapon in a little bit of additional detail because there's so much that went into the entirety of this build was theory crafted around this weapon, which is the hot kava. Sorry, the Boston came out there for a second. The heart Carver. God, that hurts. The hot cover is a dagger which now benefits from the change to blade mastery in your combat masteries, so that you now get damage and attack rating and crit chance when using daggers on the Barbarian. But it has a couple very key stats that I wanted to point out. First off, it has adds damage, so this is going to add directly to the weapon damage itself. And then in addition to that, you're able to upgrade the base of hot kava so that it has even higher base weapon damage. Add on to that the fact that it has 35% deadly strike and ignore target defense means that with our critical chance from our blade mastery, we're sitting at greater than 50% chance to crit. And the base enhanced damage and added damage on this weapon, where you could add in an Amrune for life leech, you could add in an Istrune for additional magic find. I went with Ithrune to add additional max damage, means that the added 163 damage here, as well as the 1210, is going to give us 1373 off weapon enhanced damage, basically taking our flat weapon damage and then multiplying that again by 13 to 14, depending on what your skill level looks like. Just to give you a comparison point between a very low damage base, just to show you how impactful this is, if I made Spirit our weapon, we'd only be doing 158 to 423 damage on our leap attack, even though it adds such a high value. That's why you need to find a weapon that has a very high weapon base and then use that in your main hand. See that the Heart Carver itself on our leap attack is doing 2,000 to 3,500 attack damage. On a Barbarian build, that has no additional added damage from any of its gear, and these are the numbers that we're seeing. And then on top of that, the leap attack AoE is doing 800 to 1600 damage to every single target within its radius, and again, sometimes hitting twice on each target. Just the base damage of Hot Kava, which is already pretty well known and a pretty decent weapon itself. The real trick is that it's giving us access to find item in Grimward without needing to put points into it. Earlier, we were talking about the fact that most Barbarian builds, especially budget melee builds, are strapped for points when it comes to where you need to allocate to get the most out of your Barbarian. But with only a single point added into find item and no points in Grimward, we are getting a 61% chance to find item. We are reducing enemy physical res by 95, as well as having a 12-yard radius on our Grimward. And then in addition to that, with only 1-point wonders across the board everywhere else, we have a level 10 battle orders, level 9 battle command and battle cry, as well as level 9 to natural res and increased speed, giving us a massive amount of utility, mobility, survivability, and damage. So how do you play the build? So while most people are aware of the changes to set items, one of the best sets that have been upgraded in patch 2.4 is Sazabi's set. While a lot of people have talked about this, I just want to very quickly go over it for anybody who hasn't seen it already. It's a 3-piece armor and weapons set that the Act 5 Frenzy Mercenary can use. It gives them an incredible amount of sustain by increasing their maximum life, their all res, also giving them physical damage reduction, a really fast base weapon that has decent damage on it as well, and opens up a slot for you to use something like a Lawbringer. Lawbringer is bringing Decrepify to the table. When that Decrepify goes off, you're reducing enemies' physical resistance by 50%. This also applies to bosses, boss groups, and champion groups, as well as slowing them and reducing their damage. One of the things that melee builds, considering the highest rune in a Lawbringer is a Lem rune, you can put this into just about any weapon base because the damage really doesn't matter. We just want this guy swinging as fast as possible. This means that you are able to farm Nightmare Countess and cube up runes if you really have to. And the moment that you put this onto your mercenary along with a Sazabi set, which costs almost nothing, you have a near unkillable mercenary. And I'll just highlight right here, being able to survive fire archer packs is something that most budget mercenaries just cannot do unless the player character is actively aggroing them. And then on top of that, he's able to sit there and fully tank Hell Eldritch with ease. Now, while he's not pumping out a ton of damage, the crowd control and utility from Decrepify means that if you were also attacking, you'd be absolutely murdering this pack while having a massive frontline tank that actively taunts all the monsters around him. So all of that's well and good, Mac, but how does this actually scale into the late game? This is surely just a flash in the pan for leveling and early starting, and then we'll have to transition to something else. Luckily for us, we have two things going for us. One, Barbarian Torches, which is one of the easiest ways of acquiring additional stats, res, and plus to skills, are dirt cheap. If you're to check out Tradery right now, you can buy a dirt cheap Barbarian Torch for something like an ist or two. And a lot of people are already trading away Barbarian Torches just for key sets. So if you're willing to take the time to go farm a key set, you could trade yourself into a torch right now. On top of that, we can use something that literally no other build uses and has no inherent value because no build currently uses them. And that's Barbarian Combat Skillers. You can be picking these up for Ko, Fall, or a Lem rune if they have additional stats like hit recovery or life on them, because they have no value. There's no build that actually uses them. So just to show you what it might look like, let's take a very quick look at our damage right now, which is 2200 to 3500 for the attack, as well as 800 to 1600 for the AoE. So by adding on a 1916 Barb Torch, as well as 5 Combat Skillers and a 15 All-Res Charm, which are things that can all drop as early as Nightmare Cows, our weapon damage jumps up to 2500 to 4200, as well as our AoE damage bumps up to 13 to 2500 damage. So there you have it. You have the War Leaper, you have the Leap Crier, you have the actually budget option available for a ladder start, especially for people who don't have the time to sit on trade sites and don't have as much time to play as they would like to when they were kids. You know, people want to be able to play the characters that they do, and there are finally options available as long as you're willing to think slightly outside of the box and try out some builds that go a bit against the grain what you would normally consider to be the typical meta builds. Honestly, I hope that this helps someone get into an early game Barbarian build and doesn't make it so that they have to try out Warcry before they have enough gear to eventually get into Frenzy or Whirlwind or what have you. This is something that you can literally farm starting at the Nightmare Countess, and you could have all of this gear within 2 to 3 days of pretty decent gameplay if you're willing to farm smart, use find item, and target farm those really high value champ and elite packs and get yourself into better gear. Now, for people wondering how does this transition into the late game, I'll go ahead and include both the build guide and my video for the Leap Attack Barbarian that's on maxroll.gg. This is where you would eventually get into the much more typical stuff like having a Grief and a Phoenix runeword, a Fortitude, or an Enigma, and then you would Hyper Elite Snipe, or Chaos Sanctuary Prep, or Seal Pop. Those kinds of things are available to you. Keep in mind that the video for the Player's 8 Leap Attack Barb, where I do Chaos in under 4 minutes, including killing Diablo himself, was actually done before they added additional AoE onto the Leap Attack, so the build would be even stronger than it is in that video. Again, I hope that this helps you get into the Barb a lot earlier and start to think slightly outside the box so that you can actually play these much earlier game and budget gear options without completely hamstringing yourself. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.